The sunk cost fallacy is when somebody is reluctant to abandon a strategy or a course of action that they have invested a large amount of time, money, or effort into, even though there is ample evidence to show that it might not be working out very well for them, or that there is ample evidence to show that if they changed their ways, that they would do way better in the future. And it can be really, really difficult to accept this kind of change, especially when you've put years of your life and thousands of dollars in trying to do things the way that you think would be best. But I personally think that this fallacy, the sunk cost fallacy, is rampant throughout the reptile hobby, specifically the reptile breeding hobby. And for this week's video, we want to talk about it. We want to talk about it at an overall level. We want to talk about how we see it in the hobby, and we want to talk about how we ourselves are trying to hopefully not fall into the illogical reasoning behind it and not stifle our growth as a business. So, my name's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and let's get to it. Back in October, we had picked up a Phantom Puzzle 66% possible het sunset boy from our awesome friends over at Brock Wagner Reptiles. And this boy is stunning. He is a visual puzzle, he has an extra gene in him with Phantom, and the fact that he had a 66% chance to be heterozygous for sunset was absolutely huge. Once I had seen Brock's sunset puzzle, I 100% knew that that was a project that I personally wanted to go after. And this boy would have been amazing for it because we could have put him to multiple of our sunset girls, worked a bunch of different genes into the sunset puzzle project, and we potentially could have made visual sunsets that are het for puzzle, and that would have been a great foundation for this project. So we ended up waiting for him to shed. Once we got his shed, we sent it in to our good friends over at Rare Genetics Incorporated, and when the results came back, we ended up recording it, and we showed it off a couple weeks ago, and I found out that the boy was not heterozygous for sunset.
He does not have sunset.
Ah, damn, that's super disappointing. So we are then put into a position where now we have a Phantom puzzle and we have sunsets and sunset combo females. But our Phantom puzzle boy is a hatchling, so we, no matter what, we're going to have to wait a year to grow him up, and then we could start making double het sunset puzzles with other genes in them and all this. So I started thinking about, like, is that course of action the best way to go about working this project? Because if we did it that way, we wouldn't have to spend any more money because we already have all the animals that we would need. We would have a guaranteed 100% of the offspring would be double het for sunset and puzzle whenever we ended up making those pairings. So that would be really, really good, because really what we needed is we would need to get some female double hets, grow the female double hets up, and then probably once they were about 6 months to a year old, try to pick up a male for that project, probably like a puzzle het sunset or a sunset het puzzle, depending on what would be available at that time. So in this situation, we would not really be able to start working on that project for at minimum a year, because we'd have to wait for that boy to get a year old before we start pairing him. And then just because we start pairing him at a year old doesn't mean that we are going to get a clutch right away. Probably another year after that before we actually have our double het girls, and then we need about 6 to 9 months after they were born before we would really look to pick up that sunset het puzzle or puzzle het sunset. So overall, we're looking at 2.5 to 3 years before we really got this project going. The very first place that I personally see the sunk cost fallacy showing up in the reptile hobby is when people are buying their initial animals. And I think oftentimes people, when they get into the hobby, they buy inexpensive things. They buy animals that are less than $500, and often they're not really looking at the genetics and how they fit in together. Instead, they see something that catches their eye that is beautiful, and they pick that animal up because it's amazing and they love it, and they really, really love these animals just for themselves, not having anything to do with how they fit into their ball python breeding operation. So the sunk cost fallacy comes in when somebody decides that they are going to be taking this seriously and that they are going to be breeding with the intention of trying to turn it into their full-time job at some point in time. Once this happens, there is a very, very common thing where people realize that the animals that they initially picked up just don't really serve those purposes. They might be amazing pets, but when it comes into their breeding operation, they just don't really fit into any projects anymore, and the babies that they produce just realistically aren't that in demand for whatever market they're trying to serve. So the sunk cost fallacy is when people hold on to these specific animals for much, much longer than what they need to. They keep breeding them, and because they're breeding them and they're holding them on, that means that there's less enclosures that they can use for other animals that would better fit their projects, and the offspring that they produce are animals that they have to care for until they can find a home. And because it is difficult to find a home for animals that are not super in demand, it can create a situation where they feel like that they're not selling anything. The animals that they do sell are selling for significantly less than what they thought they were going to do. And overall, if this gets really out of hand, I think that this can lead to people getting out of the hobby because they feel like that the entire market is dead, when really what happened is that they just simply picked some animals that might have been amazing pets but weren't great breeders. And because they were trying to breed animals that weren't great breeders, and they were refusing to abandon that course of action due to the sunk cost fallacy, it puts them in a position where they ultimately die for their ball python breeding operation. With all of this in mind, I went to Morph Market trying to decide, is this boy, this phantom puzzle boy, the best male for this project? Because it's going to be years before we really get it going, and the animals we create from him are going to be the foundation in our Sunset puzzle project. So, as I went to Morph Market, an animal that really stood out to me because I think it would work so well with Sunset was Josh Lumberg of the Ball Python Shed, Ultramel Puzzle Male. And this boy is absolutely insane. He is incredible. And the idea of, instead of making double het Sunset puzzles, we could potentially start making triple het Sunset Ultramel puzzles, that was really exciting. With all that said, there was some hesitation that I had for this specific male. First is that he only has Ultramel and puzzles. So while he could guarantee that all of the babies would get one copy of each and we can make those triple hets, the fact that he didn't have any other genes would mean that we'd be starting with really normal triple hets, maybe some leopard triple hets, maybe some banana triple hets, depending on exactly what we paired him into. And in addition, the price tag. So he is over $20,000 listed on Morph Market right now. And when you look at other animals that are part of this project, you could also get a puzzle 100% het Ultramel for $5,000. So if we were trying to make triple hets, would it be better to spend $20,000 plus on one male, or get a male for a quarter of the price that could potentially make the exact same babies? Because in the puzzle het Ultramel situation, all of his babies would be het puzzle, and then 50% of the babies would be het Ultramel, which again, we would find out through testing with Rare Genetics Incorporated. The sunk cost fallacy, in my opinion, also comes up when people are doing their initial research. So as somebody is coming into the hobby, whether that is just keeping or it's breeding, they will often watch tons and tons of reptile-related videos. And I think that the videos that they watch will form a lot of their initial opinions. And because it's the very first thing that they are seeing or hearing about the hobby, they assume that that is either the only way to do things or the best way to do things. And when this gets onto somewhat controversial topics like the debates between tubs versus tanks, or the debates about specific morphs or specific projects, the things that the newer people in the hobby initially get exposed to can form the basis of their viewpoints. So when they don't stop and consider that maybe there are multiple ways to do things in the hobby, or that there are multiple ways to look at a morph or multiple ways to look at a project, and they only think about, well, I've held this specific belief since I got in, so obviously that is the right thing, I think that this is another example of the sunk cost fallacy, because even though they might be presented with evidence that, for example, ball pythons can thrive in tubs and in tanks, it can be really hard to rectify that if they are super solidly in one camp or the other. So in this situation, it started making me lean away from the double visual and start looking at the puzzle het ultramelt, but it was still $5,000. And this was a situation where it probably would work out well once the boy was up to size, but he was still a hatchling, and that still pushed out our time, and it just wasn't quite enough to make me pull the trigger. And I talked about this with Courtney, and she was talking about, like, if we ended up doing this, would we end up selling Trip or would we keep him? And that was something that I started having to wrestle with, and I started thinking that we would probably, if we ended up getting a different puzzle boy for a puzzle project or sunset puzzle project, we would probably end up selling him. So we were talking about this for a while when one of our friends reached out to us because they had a puzzle project that they were moving out of. And they let us pick up some really, really amazing breeder animals that vastly accelerated our sunset puzzle project through these animals. The last thing that I want to talk about on the overview side of the sunk cost fallacy within the reptile hobby deals with marketing, and because I love talking about marketing, we can't ignore it here. So I think that it's very common for ball python breeders, reptile breeders overall, to have brands that are not really professional looking. And I don't think that every single brand needs to be super slick and looks like it was designed by a professional ad agency, but I do think that there are so many brands that are just ineffective because they either blend in with everybody else in the hobby or that they may potentially actively turn off large portions of the target market. I think that these are things that even if somebody has invested a ton of money in t-shirts or a ton of time building up their social media presence, or again, just simply their show stuff, whether it's a banner and tablecloth, I think that this might be a situation where the reluctance to change is dampening the ability for them to grow because they have obstacles that they have to overcome every single time that they are getting into any situation with any potential customer. The very first boy that we picked up is a breeder male, and he is a Confusion Red Stripe het puzzle. So he's not a visual puzzle, but he is 100% heterozygous for puzzle. So just like how we are talking about with the puzzle het ultramel, in this situation, we compare him to any of our sunset females and then test the offspring to figure out which ones are just het sunset and which ones are actually double het sunset puzzle. And with his other genes in them, Confusion and Red Stripe, which I personally think are going to go so well in the Sunset project, but they haven't been hit yet. This really, really strengthens our base in the Sunset puzzle project because we have the chance to make some Confusion Red Stripe with other genes double het Sunset puzzles, which are going to be absolutely amazing once they are up to size, once they exist, because they don't exist right now. Another big benefit of this boy is that he is a proven breeder. So once he's out of quarantine, we will be able to pair him to our sunset females this season. So rather than waiting an entire year to grow him up and then going through an entire breeding season before we get eggs, we could potentially pair him to a female who might be building follicles right now and get a clutch from him within the next couple of months, which shaves off at least a year, maybe even 2 years of the entire project for us, which is really, really important when we need to grow up these double het sunset puzzles, because those are our real goal in the project. In addition to the Confusion Red Stripe boy, we also picked up a proven breeder pastel het puzzle girl, and again, this is just adding in different ways for us to make those double het sunset puzzles. So our plans with her is that we could pair her to the Confusion boy and have a shot at making some really, really cool visual puzzles, but because our end goal for this is the Sunset puzzle project, we are actually going to put her to one of our sunset males and make some pastel double het, hopefully once we test them out, sunset puzzles in order to strengthen our base in the Sunset puzzle project. The last girl that we ended up picking up was a subadult. I don't know exactly where she's at right now, maybe 800 to 1,000 grams, but she is a blackhead Confusion Red Stripe, 66% possible heterozygous 4 puzzle. So our plans with this girl is send her shed into RGI as soon as she has her first shed, because since they recently released the puzzle test, we can know know immediately whether or not she is actually heterozygous for puzzle or if she's not heterozygous for puzzle. And if she is heterozygous for puzzle, again, we can do the exact same thing, put her to one of our sunset males and make some absolutely incredible combo double het sunset puzzles. And then with all of these animals together, we are able, hopefully, to hit some decent odds, get some females that are going to be growing up with way better genes than we possibly could have if we had stuck to the sunk cost fallacy and simply kept the phantom puzzle boy that we picked up at October as our breeder male. And we are able to do all of this way faster than if we had waited for him to grow up and then start locking. Now that we've talked about a couple of the ways that the sunk cost fallacy shows up in the reptile hobby, the way that you want to combat it is by being proactive and taking a deliberate look at yourself and your decisions. If you continue on the same trajectory that you are currently going, what obstacles are going to be in your way? What are the chances that you are going to succeed? And if you do succeed, is the decision that you are considering making or considering sticking to, is that helping you succeed, or are you succeeding despite that thing? And I personally think that if the decision is not helping you get better, if the decision is not helping you grow, I think that that is almost always going to be the sign that you need to consider a different course of action. And if you do decide that, hey, actually this specific decision is critical for my future growth, then maybe that is the situation where you double down and you really, really lean into whatever specific thing you're trying to decide. So overall, we are super, super excited about the Sunset Puzzle project, and we feel that this change in our strategy is going to put us in a far stronger position later on than if we had simply stayed to the way that we had already committed to doing things. So we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, but we will see you next time.